What Lies Beneath the Sands of Egypt, an UnchartedX journey with Ben van Kerkwyk. Episode 8 of the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
It's not a good day to be a bad guy!
Hello, and welcome everyone to the podcast. I am your host, Wayne, along with my lovely co-host and wife, Michelle.
Hey there.
Coming to you from the glacial dumping grounds known as the Michigan Basin, where we cover such topics as UFOs, aliens, conspiracy theories, paranormal encounters, ghosts, the Michigan Dog Band, Bigfoot, and all things paranormal and strange in and around Michigan. Hey everyone, we're back.
Hello, everybody.
We hope you are doing well as we get closer and closer to the release of the U.S. government's report on UFOs, or should I say UAPs.
Yeah, they're probably going to put a PPO on your UAP.
Why would they do that? Are they trying to keep things away from us?
Gee, why would they?
Yeah, I wouldn't have the slightest idea. But anyways, a big thank you again to everyone sharing and spreading the word about the podcast. We continue to grow as a podcast and a community, and we cannot be thankful enough.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Also, once again, if you have a story you would like to tell, we would like to talk to you. Please reach out to us at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com and send us a brief summary of your experience, and we will contact you to discuss things further and maybe get you on the podcast. And lastly, our merch store is now active. If you wish to support the podcast and wear some pretty cool swag, please make your way over to our merch store and take a look and see if there's anything that catches your eye. Links to our store can be found in the show notes, on our Facebook pages, and in the podcast description. We have all kinds of products to choose from. All right, Michelle, with that out of the way, I think it's that time.
It is What's in the News.
Yes, what is in the news?
Well, it's not just the temperature soaring in Tampa, Florida. It looks like NASA is now investigating the Navy UFO videos, stating that there is something there.
Interesting. So yes, in Tampa, Florida, this comes to us by way of Fox 13, Tampa Bay. They write, the growing number of UFO sightings from military pilots and civilians is driving action at NASA. New Administrator Bill Nelson said the space agency is giving the sightings serious attention and investigating because at this point, the sightings defy explanation.
So we know that Navy pilots have spotted the objects flying near sensitive government facilities. Commercial airline pilots and other civilian aviators have witnessed similar sightings in which they describe the objects appearing to defy limits of known aviation technology.
As a former member of the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee and now the head of NASA, few have more insight on the eyewitness accounts than Nelson. We are doing a lot. As a matter of fact, I have seen and been briefed on those films you have seen. I have talked to those Navy pilots. They followed it, and suddenly it would move in a direction faster than anything they've ever seen, Nelson told Fox 13.
It's not just those couple of Navy pilots. This has happened now among a number of aviators. So there is something there. We just don't know what it is, he continued. And this is something obviously we've heard before and we've read in other articles. So what I did when I got into NASA a month ago, this is still Nelson speaking, I asked our chief scientist and the science directorate if they would look at it from a matter of science and see if it can shed any further light on this.
Nelson said they cannot rule out the possibility a foreign adversary that has made a technology leap and may be using it to spy on U.S. national security interests. That's why we need to find out, because if there is an adversary with that kind of technology, then we definitely need to be very, very careful, he added.
Nelson said he expects the Biden administration to release an unclassified version of a report relating to the sightings in a month or so. So, wondering if that timeline is past the 25th of June.
Well, this article came out on June 11th, so maybe he's talking about the June 25th release.
Could we be waiting longer, folks? The article goes on to say the New York Times said earlier this month that the report says the U.S. government cannot give a definitive explanation of the UFOs, but has found no evidence that they are linked to aliens.
Well, what do they mean by aliens?
And so now we wait and we wonder.
Well, there you have it, folks. That's the news for this podcast. If you want to look at the article and read it yourself, you can go to our show notes and find the link to the article there. All right, so I have a teachable moment, a correction that needs to be made that was brought to my attention, and boy, did I goof on this one. So back in episode 4, The Triangle's Playground, one guy's earth-shattering account, we talked about a news article called Pentagon UFO Report. They acknowledged the reality, whistleblower says. In that article, they talked about observing UFOs flying at speeds close to 11,000 miles per hour. And I had mentioned that at that speed, those craft were doing close to Mach 2. This was way off. So basically, the speed of sound depends on many different atmospheric conditions, such as temperature, your altitude, etc. What that basically means is that there's all kinds of things that will affect when you break the sound barrier. So at 20 degrees Celsius, or about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, the speed of sound is about 767 miles per hour. So a vehicle moving at 11,000 miles per hour is doing about 14 times the speed of sound. I was just a little bit off.
Just like I always say that reading is fundamental, sweetie, the zeros are fundamental too. Do not forget the zeros.
Yeah, 1,100 miles per hour versus 11,000 miles per hour.
Oopsie.
All right, let's go ahead and get into some shout-outs.
All right, we've got Contact in the Desert 2021 will be a virtual event held on June 25th through the 28th, but you will have over 2 weeks to view the event. Check out contactinthedesert.com for more details.
Up next, we have the Brothers of the Serpent podcast, one of my favorites, and simply, they are two brothers that explore the mysteries of the ages, the ancients, and the modern day. Also, the Snake Bros will be our guest for our June 27th podcast. This is going to be another great conversation with a great couple of guys, and you're not going to want to miss this episode. Make sure you check that out.
To our friends at the Midnight Truck Stop, hosted by Big T and Blue Knight, a very cool couple of guys with a great concept as they explore those strange and unexplained incidents that so many of us have experienced while traveling along desolate highways. Give them a listen as they collect stories from all around the country, from truckers and travelers alike.
Next, we go across the pond to the UK and give a shout out to Phenomena magazine, the world's most recognized e-zine of its kind. This is a free monthly publication produced by Zohar Entertainment Group and Map It. The magazine investigates the whole realm of the strange, profound, unknown, and unexplained, delving into paranormal, UFO, cryptids, parapsychology, and Fortean events. The magazine can be downloaded every month for free in PDF format. Check out the show notes for a link and download the magazine. Oh, and you should be seeing something coming up in Phenomena magazine. that includes your humble little host on this podcast. More details to follow.
And we have the Lost in the Dark podcast hosted by Burton and Aaron. This is a pretty cool podcast that bills itself as an attempt to capture incredible conversations between best friends as we explore all of our passions, but especially music and the world of heavy metal. So if you're into paranormal investigations and loud heavy metal music, give them a listen. Strong language, but it's heavy metal and the paranormal. What else would you expect?
All right, before we get into the hot topic for tonight and our interview,
drum roll, please. It is now a time for a word from our sponsors.
Join me, George Norrie, for the Worldwide Contact in the Desert Virtual UFO Conference, June 25th to June 28th. Contact in the Desert is an epic weekend of adventure, jam-packed with exciting explorations into UFOs, ancient civilizations, AI, crop circles, forbidden archaeology, disclosure, and the newest evidence of ongoing contact, sightings, and leading-edge science. This amazing weekend delivers more than 130 presentations and special events showcasing 67 speakers from all over the world, with 2 extra weeks to view your favorite leading experts, including Avi Loeb with Clyde Lewis, Linda Moulton Howe, Paul Hellyer, John Lear, Russell Targ, David Childress, Doc Wallach, and more. With breaking articles in the New York Times and acknowledged naval sightings, and more importantly, the new release of classified documents on the day of the soft opening of Contact in the Desert, we are your source for inside information. Join us June 25th at contactinthedesert.com to get your tickets today. Make contact, contactinthedesert.com.
coming up, we have a great interview. I am so excited to have Ben from UnchartedX on the show. Michelle, why don't you tell us a little bit about Ben?
Well, Ben van Kerkwyk is an Australian researcher, writer, and content creator now living in the U.S. He runs the UnchartedX.com website and associated YouTube channel and produces podcasts and short-form documentaries on various topics dealing with ancient mysteries and the new scientific work that has a bearing on the story of human history. After 20 years and a successful multinational career in IT, along with a Bachelor of Science from James Cook University, Ben brings a unique perspective when investigating the evidence for ancient high technology and casts such mysteries in the light of many new discoveries like those for the Younger Dryas Cataclysm and the extension of the human civilization timeline. A lifelong student and fan of history, Ben has been traveling the world for decades and has filmed at many ancient sites, as well as interviewing and interacting with many of the leading authors and researchers working in this field. Without further ado,
ladies and gentlemen, please help us welcome to the podcast,
Ben van Kerkwyk.
All right, everybody, we are happy to introduce to the podcast Ben from UnchartedX. Ben, welcome.
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, pleasure to be here. It's good to talk with you guys. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, absolutely. We are very excited to have you on the podcast. Yeah, so we're just going to jump right into this and see where we go. So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into researching these ancient locations, such as the pyramids of Egypt, Saqqara, South America, all of these places? When your bio talks about you having a successful background in IT, so what really brought you into, I guess it would be called, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this where they call this forbidden archaeology?
I'm sure that's one of the terms that gets used to describe it. I know there's I think a couple of books. Is it a Michael Cremo book? Someone like that wrote a book called that. But I mean, it's more of I think if you're talking career, it's more of a YouTuber career. I mean, I lump in. I mean, there's mainstream, and then you kind of have to call everything else something. It's more or less I'd call it alternative. I consider it to be an alternative community mostly.
Okay.
Not that it's a hard to put a term on it, but I guess certainly it's a different take on some of the established narratives around history, and there's a lot of different flavors of that alternative, but I would probably call it something like that. But in terms of a background, yeah, I mean, I and what I do, it's more or less YouTube, and a few other things, a bit of streaming here and there, and just trying to share my research with people. If pressed, I usually describe myself as being a YouTuber these days. I just make videos on the internet.
So what got you into researching these ancient locations?
I have always been interested. My mother we were talking earlier about teachers. So my mother was a history teacher. She was always quite passionate about it. So I grew up, and I went through high school. I was good at English and history. Was always interested in that, and almost went that direction at university. Just but I had another interest in IT and some other things. And I thought, well, careers and money are to be made in IT, so I kind of went that way. But I never lost the interest. I would always read sort of traditional history books. I was very interested in the Roman Empire, and I would get the chance to travel. So part of the IT job was I spent a lot of time, been living outside of Australia now for 17 years, lived in Asia for a couple of years, and would travel a lot all around the world. So I'd take up weekends and a few days here and there to go and see stuff, and generally with history in mind. And so I was interested in, but then, the thing that really got me into it, and it was the same story you hear from a lot of people, is ultimately Graham Hancock. So reading his work, Fingerprints, which I didn't actually read until in the 2000s, after it was released. I mean, I was still in high school when that came out. But that ultimately got me into it, and I sort of got interested in Graham's work, followed him, and I saw one of his appearances on kind of the Rogan Experience podcast. It was his first appearance there was just fantastic, and he also had the whole consciousness side to his work, which I found also very interesting. Now I knew nothing about at that time, so I went down that rabbit hole. But I kind of followed Graham, and then a tweet popped up. He tweeted and said, "Hey, I'm going to Peru and Bolivia for a couple of weeks. Anyone want to come along?" And I was like, shut up and take my money immediately. And, I jumped on it, and that was
absolutely,
that was 2013. And so I spent a couple of weeks in Peru and Bolivia with Graham Hancock. Brian Forrester, it was a trip with him as well. I didn't know who Brian was at the time. And that crowd and just, it opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I was just blown away because Graham did a number of presentations, and everyone in that group was all switched on. I love these sort of tours because, you almost the crowds are a little self-selecting when people sign up to do stuff based on authors and perspectives, and I've enjoyed those sort of tours. So yeah, that really sucked me in. And then when the chance came up a couple of years later to join him again in Egypt, I jumped on that. So, and that was 2015 was my first trip to Egypt, and then I was done. Like, I was still working and interested, but I just progressively got more engaged, and I was taking more and more time off work to travel, and just absolutely fascinated by these topics and wanting to do more research. And then had the harebrained scheme with a friend of mine while in Egypt we felt that there was room for either a documentary or some form of content, the new medium. I honestly thought that there's so much good information. It's been around for a long time too. There's guys that came before Graham as well, and this has been an idea that's been around for a long time. But typically, it's stuff that's buried in books, and you have to be very engaged and interested in the topic to get to it. And I just thought there was a way. There was room for someone to take some of those concepts from those books and combine it with a fresh look at these sites, and then present it in that new medium. And to be perfectly honest, the other thing that my interest in technology was kind of the other element to this, because this was about the time where you had the rise of good consumer grade stabilized, high quality video gear, and particularly the gimbal stuff. Like I just, you had to spend a fortune on gear to get like really high quality footage, but before this time. But then all of a sudden there's this explosion of these, these stabilized cameras and I think in the 4K and all the rest of it. So with those two things, that was where we got sort of started, but went into it not having the first clue about how to make documentaries or do anything. I'd done some video editing and things, but you just kind of end up, I think in YouTube and the internet video is kind of a natural progression, because I do want to write a book, and that's I've been working on that, but non-fiction's tough. You have to either write the best book or you have to create an audience. So YouTube, it's a natural place to start then building an audience, and then I couldn't indefinitely just sustain myself. I eventually quit my work to go do this. We spent a couple of years trying to get a library of material, traveling around, filming in a lot of places. I still use a lot of that material. I've been traveling obviously since then, but and then you get there with like, well, you need to make it sustainable and stuff, and that's that YouTube model. Like I originally thought, let's make a documentary, but how do you make a documentary?
Right.
It's the whole Hollywood and just film studios and selling film, and that's a whole different world. So
yeah,
but that's the long way around of getting into it. There was Hancock, and then my own interest, and then the opportunity came up to try it out, and I tried it out, and it's kind of gotten to a point where it's relatively sustainable, and I'm gonna ride the ship until it sinks, more or less. I really enjoy it. I feel very privileged to get to do something like this that I very much enjoy doing, and then I'm just stunned, and I have a lot of gratitude for the people that choose to support me, because it's you have to. It's not just YouTube, and I'm not like that big on YouTube where it's sustainable purely through YouTube. So that's why I push like the value for value model, and it's my long suffering wife as well.
Yeah. Well, you've also started on Twitch. I think is really cool because people get to come in and see, like I come into your Twitch channels and watch your work, and people can see what it's like in the time that you have to invest to make these videos. And these videos, by the way, everybody, are not just shot with a phone and really bad audio. And these are high quality. I thought they were real documentaries. Not that they're not real documentaries, but when I first ran into them, I think the first video I ever saw was the boxes at Saqqara, and was just blown away, because nobody ever talks about these things that are there. And that's why I think there's a waking knowledge out there for people to learn about this stuff. And I think you and is it Jimmy from Brighter Insight? Is that
Bright Insight? Yeah.
Bright Insight, right?
Yeah.
So some great stuff out there. So Mike, another question I had for you off of your bio, it talks about your interest in high technology in ancient times. Now, usually when people say something like that, immediately people go to lasers, anti-gravity machines, and all of this stuff. Can you give us the definition of what you mean by high technology?
Yeah, that's actually I should probably try to define that at some point in my work as well, because I don't typically mean anything specific. What I am talking about with mostly what I investigate is it's the evidence for technology that's generally way beyond what the dynastic Egyptians and other ancient cultures as we know them would have been capable of, with the primitive tools and capabilities that we know that they had. And I say primitive, it's relative to us today, I guess. And that's the general view that mainstream history takes on them. We have, it's a little bit of the arrogance of anthropology in general is you have to kind of take yourself up and look and be able to and consider yourself superior to be able to judge and determine the capabilities of previous civilizations or other people. These things happen, but in general, it's the evidence for objects, and I think for technology the high technology that was required to manufacture and make a lot of these things, and well beyond sort of the hand tools, copper chisels, pounding stones, flint knives. There's a lot of it's in that direction. But I do include some of those things you mentioned, like as possibilities. One of the things that I usually am pretty clear about is that a lot of this stuff and it's sort of this like, what were the pyramids, if they were functional, what were they for? I don't speculate a lot. I do, and when I do speculate, I try to be real clear about it. But I'm not kind of claiming that I know what it was or how it was done. Mostly what I'm trying to show is that our established story of history that explains it is incorrect. Like it's, and I think it's demonstrably and provably incorrect when you get into some of the details of the engineering and the objects, and you talk to the experts, the actual experts with construction and engineering and stone carving and stone masonry, those types of things. That's one of the bugbears I have with, I guess, mainstream archaeology and Egyptology in particular is that if something is ancient, then all of a sudden that makes the archaeologist the expert on it. And they kind of claim expertise over that entire domain of everything. But in reality, that we should be talking to engineers about engineering problems and construction experts about the construction problems and so on and so forth with stone carvers, because I think I mentioned this in my last video. You don't ask the archaeologist to design the chair that he's sitting in, but if it's an ancient chair, he's going to tell you that he knows best how it was built. And that's one of the other real interesting elements to it for me, is that talking to experts, and it's almost invariably, I enjoy going to Egypt with engineers and people that really understand what some of this stuff takes. And they just, more often than not, they'll find the orthodox explanations for things to be entirely laughable. Now, some of it boggles the mind too. And I'm not ruling out things like anti-gravity in the past.
Correct.
In fact, I do go so far as to say that I think a lot of these objects were functional. And again, I think they were functional before history as we know it ever arose. But what that function is up to speculation. Chris Dunn's got a great theory on the Giza pyramids as a power plant. I think that's and his theory kind of encompasses all of the elements of it. I think it's a great theory, but it's still kind of looking at it from within our perspective of technology and perspective. I spent a lot of time trying to explain perspective on technology and my background's in technology as a technologist, and it's a simple exercise to think about the context and try to understand how we look at things and how our perspective shapes what we see and how we judge it. And all you have to do is ask yourself is, do you think we'll know more about the world in 100 years, in 1,000 years? You could consider the rate of technological advance since like the 80s, which a lot of people I'm sure remember, like the pre-internet and then into the internet and phones and everything. Like there's a huge, tremendous rate of knowledge and increase, a ramp that we're on as a species. And I'm sure that we'll know more. So it stands to reason that there are answers and things that are outside of our understanding, outside of our technological domain. We have this electrochemical approach to problem solving as a species. And I think there are other methods and other technological domains that I think some of these answers and some of these sites may well fit into. And my whole point on all of this is I think we should be approaching a lot of these mysteries and these obvious contradictions to the story of history with open minds and using our technology, using our capability to investigate them to the best extent that we can. And you have to be open to some of these concepts to do that. But because we're not, and in general, Orthodox Egyptology and archaeology just dismisses any claims of advanced technology, they just won't look into it. Like you can't have that discussion; it just gets dismissed, and
they
don't
stop
go
the conversation.
Yeah, and they don't go and investigate it. Like it boggles my brain to this day, as far as I know, nobody has taken a high definition LiDAR scanner and scan some of these objects. Like actually, let's determine the degree of precision that is in these things once and for all. Let's drag a ground penetrating radar across all of the Giza plateau. We don't do it. And I mean, I was on tour last year in, when was it? November, December. And, some of our people in our group had the latest iPhone, which has, a basic LiDAR scanning capability. It's not too bad. It's down to a couple millimeter of definition, but it's no professional piece of equipment. And I think we were probably the first group to actually 3D scan some of those boxes in the Serapium. I mean, I have some of those scans, and they're not, again, what we need is the real high definition scans from like the professional level gear. But that seems such like a layup to me. Like, why don't we go and define these things and scan them and try and learn some more about them? But it doesn't happen. So a lot of my work is trying to get at the truth by spreading the knowledge that, hey, a lot of this stuff's way more advanced than we can explain within the context of our current version of history. Why don't we try and get to the truth by investigating it with an open mind?
Yeah. And I do want to revisit that, the whole of resisting any kind of new ideas because of the orthodoxy of the Egyptologist and things like that. I do want to revisit that here in a few minutes. What about your first trip to an ancient site? Was that with Graham Hancock? And what were your first impressions when you saw the ancient site?
Which one? Anything?
Your first one. Your very first one? Yeah.
I think what that might have been, it was Rome or it was China. Like there was, and parts of China. It depends what you mean by ancient as well. Like I've been fascinated by history. Ancient is, I think there's various flavors of it. What what I have found to be quite remarkable, like even Rome, I love Rome, and I very much enjoyed spending time around there and looking at it. But there's a connection to that culture that we can make sense of and imagine ourselves being part of. That isn't there when you look at some of the stuff in South America, for example, or Egypt. And there's and the real megalithic stuff. I think the megalithic stuff is what is truly fascinating to me, because it's so alien to our perspective. And that's the thing, people, if you've never been to Egypt, when you get to Egypt and you find yourself up on the Giza Plateau, there's this almost an escapism that happens. It takes you out of your world because it's so alien to our way of life and what we are generally looking at. And the size of everything's amazing. But it really, and similar in South America, when you really kind of sit there and look at some of these sites like Sacsayhuaman or whatever, it just it takes you away from that modern world. It's so vastly different that it's interesting. But the first I guess my first megalithic stuff was unless China or Rome would count, probably South America in 2013.
Was that when you went
back
with
there a
Graham?
number of times? Yeah, it was. That was my first trip down to Peru and Bolivia. Yep.
And what was the first site that you stepped out on, that megalithic site, and blew you away?
Sacsayhuaman probably.
Yeah.
There was we hit a couple, and that's it's easy to get to. You sort of fly into Cusco and drive up there, or you can just about walk up there, to be honest. And I think that was probably one of the earlier spots that we got to. But there's a number of highlights in South America. There's a lot of different sites to see. A couple of lesser known ones that I've always been a big fan of: Napa Huaca, sometimes also called Napa Inglesia, which is this little cave. It's a very remote spot that not many people visit, but has some of the most astonishing carved bluestone, which is granite artifacts in it. It actually shares some angles and some similarities with the Great Pyramid. Very megalithic, also a very good example of how the later cultures, the Inca, would respect and revere and replicate some of the megalithic work. And I kind of, to preface that, I firmly believe that there was a megalithic culture that existed long ago in South America, and then a huge gap of time post-cataclysm likely took place where there wasn't very many people. But when the Inca rolled into that part of Peru, from the south they came up. I think they found an abandoned megalithic city in Cusco, and then they settled there, and they set that as their kind of seat of power, and they renovated and reused a lot of this stuff and built on top of it. And I think the evidence for that type of renovation work is very evident in South America.
Okay. Yeah,
it's insane. But yeah, probably Sacsayhuaman was probably one of the first, but there's a whole bunch of them around Cusco, and Cusco itself is an amazing city. It's full of megalithic stuff.
Right. Okay. Moving back to Egypt, the boxes they call it tombs, right? But Saqqara,
sarcophagi.
Yeah. At what is known as the Serapium. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a little bit of information about what your research revealed with those things? And if anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, this is where you got to go to UnchartedX.com, and you got to watch these videos. So, being an audio podcast, everybody, I know it's difficult to probably picture these in your brain without any common reference, but go to his videos and check these things out for sure. But Ben,
I've got a whole series on my YouTube, like a playlist of videos about the Serapium. It is my favorite site in Egypt. It's a remarkable site, and again, not that many people visit it. It was shut for a long time, undergoing renovations from the Department of Antiquities, which is cool. But it's at a high level. There's nothing to see on the surface. It's an underground series of massive galleries and chambers cut into the limestone bedrock at Saqqara. It's a little bit away from the regular part of Saqqara, the Step Pyramid and Jose's Pyramid and a few of the others. It's off on its own, a little bit off to the corner. It's still part of Saqqara, but it's a huge underground complex. And I'm talking, when I say underground galleries, these aren't little tunnels. You could drive a Volkswagen down these tunnels. Right. They're huge arcing avenues with these massive alcoves sunken alcoves that are staggered off to the sides of these tunnels. There's a whole series of these main galleries, and in these galleries, in fact, on the whole side, there's 24 of them. They're the biggest single piece granite boxes, and well, in fact, there's syenite and granodiorite, and there's a number of different materials, but in general, extremely hard stone. These are single piece, massive boxes that, combined with their lids, some of them weigh up to around 100 tons. And they show no end of signatures of very advanced construction and manufacturing techniques, very high degrees of precision. There's evidence for machining on these lids. They're polished down to a mirror finish. And I should say that a lot of it's, I mean, I've been researching the site and the work of others, and I've done some of my own little bits of measuring, but far and away, I stand on the shoulders of other people that have actually done the small amount of kind of metrology that we have on this site. Guys like Chris Dunn, for example. I also, I reference a lot of the archaeologists from the past, guys like Flinders Petrie, but Chris Dunn is kind of, I consider him to be somewhat of like Flinders Petrie's modern successor in terms of him being an engineer that takes an engineering approach to these things, and he's done quite a bit of work looking at these boxes, and some of their features are absolutely insane. Like there's, you have these huge, big, flat wall surfaces that are flat and perfectly flat to within thousandths of an inch. You have, the angle, so the right angle between like a side wall and a back wall in these boxes, a perfect 90 degrees, again to within thousandths of an inch, measured with sort of high precision tools, things like straight edges and precision squares. And this becomes an interesting relative geometry challenge too, because the boxes are perfect end to end. So in some cases, these boxes, I mean, you're talking about internal walls that are 10 feet apart on like the long axis, and those walls are perfectly perpendicular with each other and flat. And it's just, and again, remember, this is a single piece box. It was carved from a single piece of stone. So it's hollowed out and then shaped. And if you screw up anywhere, you've got to change the geometry of the whole box. We could spend 2 hours just talking about these boxes, and in my videos, I've probably got more than 2 hours talking about them. But they're remarkable bits of evidence for ancient high technology, I think, and advanced capability. Because there's really, I consider there's a couple of like main aspects to this, and these are, there's the evidence for. You kind of have all three signs that I consider as main signs for something being requiring a form of advanced technology. And the first one is evidence for machining. So we actually have tool marks on some objects around Egypt, things like circular saws, high-speed tubular drills, and advanced forms of cutting through the stone. Those are existent. I think those can't be explained with the regular methods. I don't believe anybody's shown that they can. And we have a little bit of that in some of these boxes, although in most cases the boxes in the Serapium have been polished to a point where you don't have any marks left on them at all. The other piece of evidence is precision, and these certainly have that in spades. Really, you can spend a lot of time talking about the various aspects of high precision. And again, you don't. This is stuff that we would struggle to make. We can make with computer guided tools today to get to those levels of precision, but you just simply can't achieve some of these levels of precision with hand tools. And then the third aspect that I think is a real indicator is the sheer size and mass of some of these objects. Now, it is possible to move 100 tons outside and with primitive methods, but you have a real challenge in the Serapium because, I mean, the biggest box in here, you've got less than a foot of clearance in the tunnels. You simply cannot fit the manpower in there to move that. And in my videos, we go through some of the math, how these boxes got into these chambers, and then they're not even just in these alcoves, are sunken alcoves. So they're actually off the main path. That they drop down about 6 feet, and they're perfectly centered in these alcoves, all 24 of them. How they got down in there is an absolute mystery, and nobody's been able to sufficiently explain it. You certainly couldn't do it with any form of manual labor, and absolutely couldn't do it with the methods that we know the ancient Egyptians used, because they weren't big users of animals, and they, not a lot of, even early on, like they weren't even supposed to have had access to the wheel. So there's a lot of mystery to the Serapium, and I think it's just chock-a-block full of like smoking gun proof for ancient high technology. Plus, what is it? They're not no one's found anything in these boxes. They were all found open when it was discovered, I think in the 1850s by Auguste Mariette, except for one box which was sealed and closed. He used dynamite on it to blow it up.
Is that the one that's broken in the corner?
Yeah, the big busted one that's in the corner. And absolutely nothing on the inside. So
right,
nobody's found anything on there. There's one box that's got a bunch of writing on it. That's a bunch of chicken scratch, which is a whole other topic that I get into. That the writing doesn't remotely match the technology of the boxes, but that's how they date the site. It's based on this crappy writing that's basically the box has been vandalized. But that's,
yeah. Now, what does the orthodoxy say about what these were?
Well, they're labeled as bull sarcophagi. So for the Apis bull, which was a sacred creature to the dynastic Egyptians, and they were known to mummify and bury bulls. And there's been, even in like the second pyramid in in the box in there, they found bull bones. They found they've got plenty of mummified Apis bulls. However, it's important with the Serapium to realize that no bull remains or any bones. There's no bull in the Serapium. What they did find nearby is an area called the Lesser Galleries, which doesn't connect to the Serapium. It is a much more primitive set of tunnels, something that's totally doable by the dynastic Egyptians. And in those tunnels, they found wooden crates with bull bones in them. And it's nearby. And so they kind of smear this explanation of... It also has something to do with the name. There's an Apis bull. I have a video with Yusuf talking through the translation and how I think some of the glyphs that are on there help them determine, or at least make the judgment that these are bull sarcophagi, which is absolute nonsense. There's really no proof for it, and it's just such a silly idea. Like, we have never made anything like this in our culture. And in fact, Chris Dunn asked granite companies to make them, and they just, apart from the absolutely astronomical cost of trying to move and transport and get 100-ton, this is a finished 100. You got to start with a 150-ton block, if not more. They just wouldn't do it, and the only way they would do it is, we'll make 5 slabs and bolt them together. Like, you remember, part of this, part of the interesting thing here is that these are single-piece boxes, not bolted together. So, and they're perfect on the inside. Like, it almost seems to me that there was more emphasis placed on the insides of these boxes being utterly perfect, reflective, perfect flat surfaces, and just shine to a mirror finish. And this just doesn't make sense if you're making a bull coffin. Like, you could, and also you could fit probably 10 bulls in each of 10 mummified bulls in these boxes. They're huge. And
wouldn't the precision of those boxes on the inside scream that there was some type of a function, not just as a holding place for a bunch of dead bulls,
right?
It's
something I have a whole video on precision, and I dive in. It's an interesting topic because there is absolutely a relation, and I contend, and I think this is, and engineers and people that understand this do as well, I'm sure, there is a relationship between precision and function. There is a cost to developing precision, and with the degree of precision that we're talking about with these boxes, it's a prohibitive cost. It's extremely expensive to develop that capability to be able to do this type of precise work. Therefore, you only ever do it in order to gain some sort of functional return. There's any number of examples. Like, there's a fantastic book about, I forget, I've got it here somewhere, about precision, and how precision sort of shaped the modern world, and a lot of it got started with things like watchmaking and even cannon manufacture, naval cannons. We eventually got to the point of being realizing that you had to be pretty precise with how you bored those things out, and it had a massive impact on performance, and then also accurate timekeeping. Precision has shaped the modern world, but we only do it for the return of a function. Like, good example is microprocessors, integrated circuits. Like, we're getting down to 3 nanometer process now, which is incredible, and it costs billions and billions of dollars to develop this capability, but we only do it because there's a massive return in shrinking the power footprint down to that size. So that's one thing I contend is there's a degree of precision in this stuff indicates that there is some function, or at least there was a function that was being chased in order to develop that capability. Because once we have the capability, once your manufacturing process develops capability to deliver these sort of precision results, then that's just what it delivers. So a good example is like vehicles today, like we've just panel gaps from American cars in the 60s to what they are now is there. And you guys are in Detroit, you're probably well aware of it. Like this, we've gotten far more precise in this stuff, and that's because our manufacturing capabilities have gotten better. And again, we've done that because we've been chasing a specific return on some sort of function. So yeah, I absolutely think that this place was functional. I had no idea what it was for. There's a lot of other clues that you can go through in how that it seemed to be functional, in that it was very, very important to the builders of this that these boxes were solid. There was no cracks in them. And they would go to the extent of so, a lot of these stones have small cracks on the surface. They would scoop out cracks. They would empty cracks. So a lot of these boxes have these like egg-shaped or eggshell sort of divots dug into them and chunks missing from them on the outsides. None of this on the inside, by the way. On the outsides, they have all these divots dug into them. And all of these non-flat surfaces are also perfectly polished, which must have been an absolute pain in the butt, unless you had some easy way of polishing it. But I think they were chasing that so there wasn't any cracks. And there's a huge box that's in an off-limits area of this site that I've been into, one of the biggest boxes there, and it's kind of parked in this back corner. It's not finished, and I think it was parked there because it has this giant crack in it, and they went, well, it's cracked, we can't use it. Which is, of course, if you're just burying balls in it and you're closing it up, who cares if it's got a few cracks in it? Like even small cracks you can't see. So that's another clue that there was some functionality required. These boxes had to be solid and could withstand vibration, perhaps. I don't know. They're also faceted in terms, like flat surfaces, like a gemstone. They're cut in all these different flat angles. So there's these sharp corners on them. They're not necessarily symmetrical or anything, but they seem to have been faceted for some reason. And another interesting aspect to this site that people don't realize is that all of the galleries, there's no two boxes facing each other. They're all offset. So there's no two chambers that are directly opposing each other. It's all very much a staggered array of where these boxes are located. So yeah, there's a lot to suggest that it's functional. I just I don't know what that function was, but I am fairly convinced that it was functional at some point, and that was its intent, its purpose.
Right. Looking today, you just released a video on the second pyramid. Mm-hmm. Can you give us kind of our audience a high level overview of what that video is about?
Sure. Yeah, it's always a relief to get a video out. And I've been working on this one for a couple of months, and it's something I've been thinking about for a few years, actually, the middle pyramid. So the second pyramid, the middle pyramid, Khephren pyramid,
Mountain of the West, is that right?
Mountain of the West, that's another term. Yeah, it's been known as, it was actually known as the Great Pyramid as well at one point. Although the name switched over to the Great Pyramid as we know it. But so I think there's a lot. So one of the things people just assume, and you read in the book, this was built by Khafra, and Khafra also is the guy that supposedly built the Sphinx and everything. And it's, in fact, what's interesting about it, people not everybody knows, but pyramids don't stand alone; they have a complex. And in the case of, these complex includes a lot of other buildings and structures. And in the case of the middle pyramid, because it sits in the middle of the Great Pyramid and the third, the smaller pyramid that's attributed to Menkaura. These are all Fourth Dynasty pyramids. These are all supposedly like one generation after the other guys that built them too. The Middle Pyramids complex includes the very famous Sphinx and the Valley Temple. That is like some of the highlights that you'll see if you go to Egypt. And these are massively megalithic structures. It also includes the causeway, the main huge causeway that's, it's 500 meters long, that connects the pyramid to the Sphinx and the Valley Temple. And there's another megalithic structure up there with the pyramid called the Pyramid Temple, also called the Mortuary Temple, because it's all supposedly a tomb. But what's interesting about the Middle Pyramid is the dating and the attribution to Khafra is actually, there's very little that suggests that. And this is, there's not a single hieroglyphic mark on the pyramid. No mummies have been found. So the video is all about an investigation into it, because I think there's a lot to suggest that, not only do I think that the Middle Pyramid likely came before the Great Pyramid, which is contrary to, I guess, the orthodox story of history, which says that the Great Pyramid, the biggest one, the best one, was the first one, which is of course how civilizations work and technology progresses.
Sure.
Right? We do our best work up front, and then don't ever manage to repeat it, which is the great contradiction of the story of ancient Egypt altogether. Actually, the Old Kingdom, they popped out of nowhere and made everything incredibly well, and then just declined for 3,000 years. Which is absolutely the opposite to how every other civilization has ever worked. But I think that pyramid complex may have been there before the Great Pyramid, and I also think it's quite likely far older than the dynastic Egyptian civilization. And I run through a lot of the different signs that point to that, some of the evidence for it, and kind of make the case. But it's a good dig into some of the structures, and there's a few things up there that people may not realize. Some of the engineering features of that pyramid are astonishing. One of my favorite things about it is that it's actually been built into the side of a sloping hillside. So, one of the craziest parts of the whole story of history, which is the idea that these pyramids took 20 years to build. And it's kind of ridiculous when you start to do the math on that, like how many blocks there were. It's like 2.5 million blocks, and it's more than 5 million tons of stone, and a lot of and on the middle pyramid you've got a lot of granite. That it was all cased in granite. You're talking about tens of thousands of tons of granite, and all that stuff has to come from more than 500 miles away, and it works out to something like 1 block every 2 minutes for a sustained period of 20 years, and that's just assuming you build the pyramid.
Right.
But the thing is, you've probably got years, if not a decade worth of work in the bedrock before you can build this pyramid, because these guys had to carve out a massive enclosure that on one end is 30 plus feet deep, and then flatten the ground, and then on the eastern side build it up. So they had to put these huge foundation tiles in the ground to level the ground again on the downslope side. And some of these foundation tiles are probably 150, 200 tons, and they all fit together like this perfect 3-dimensional jigsaw. And so we look at a lot of those features. There's a lot of engineering that is of interest in the second pyramid. And my next video, at some point here, will be part 2 to that, because I, in an hour, managed to do about half of the things that I wanted to do.
So it was all done with hammers, copper chisels, and
that's right,
pounding stones, right?
Yep, diorite pounders, copper chisels, and flint chisels too. So I like to make fun of the copper chisel thing. It's just because copper chisels won't do anything to granite. But to be truthful, that flint was another element that was used, and that you can slowly work away at you find a harder tool. But no iron, no steel, even some steel and iron's not going to do much to some of that granite that's up there,
right?
And then diorite, and let alone the other harder stones, cyanide.
And when you're talking about like limestone, okay, so limestone is a sedimentary rock. It's not the hardest, and you can break through it, and you can saw through it in certain ways. But when you get to granite and you get to statues that are anatomically correct beyond what you could possibly do with a chisel, or the work that's done. And I think Johanna, which we're going to have on the podcast later this month,
cool.
She shows a video and talks about the bowls and the schist disc, I believe, and all of the and saying it's pottery is incorrect. Because that would give you the impression that somebody's got some clay on a spinning tabletop and you're manipulating it while it's wet. These are granite. Granite's like on Mohs hardness scale of like 0 to 10 is somewhere close to 8 or 9.
To 7, 6 and 7.
Yeah. So or I'm thinking of corundum, but
there's a corundum jar in there as well. So I've got videos on the same topics.
Okay.
I'm well familiar with the evidence in the Egyptian Museum,
and they're perfect.
So utterly symmetrical. I have one of my recent videos was about the precision stone vases, and particularly the step pyramid, because 40,000 of these were found, or more actually than 40,000 were found beneath the step pyramid, which is a 3rd dynasty structure. So again, the earliest parts of the Egyptian time frame. And in fact, the schist disc, which is I mean, very well known, notorious almost, as a people sort of interpret it and think it's made for all sorts of different functions. I think it's possible it was made to make rope, but some people think it's an acoustic device or whatever you think it is. There's no question that it's a remarkable piece of stone carving and absolutely impossible to do by hand. Like it's like this crazy shape with these folded wings and this outer edge. It was found broken. They did fix it. They've done a pretty good job of fixing it. But that thing, people don't realize that was found in a First Dynasty tomb, like a First Dynasty burial. And I kind of make the point in one of my videos. It's like, imagine, and as I'm sure happens, imagine that there's a black market trade in some of these antiquities, which I'm sure there is. And some people
absolutely.
probably have these vases. They've got stuff in their private collection. Some rich guy in Germany or something, and he dies, and he's like been passionate about this stuff forever. So he gets buried in a mausoleum somewhere with his treasures that are vastly ancient. They're like third dynasty Egyptian. And then our civilization ends, and 10,000 years later, somebody else digs him up, and they find this guy with those bowls.
Right.
They're going to probably think that he made them, or he had them made. Like, old things are precious. Like, I think it's perfectly reasonable to think that some of these objects may well have been inherited and already vastly ancient when they were buried with the nobility in the tombs that we found them in today. Like, I think that's not at all unreasonable. But it just kind of gets dismissed because it's like, no, that's ours. And you kind of have the same problem with a lot of these jars where the writing is just this chicken scratch that doesn't match the precision and perfect nature of the object itself, which, obviously you have the ability to make straight lines and sharp angles and polish the stone because the evidence is right there on the object. But those are never characteristics that we see in the writing on some of these older objects. But the museum's chock full of that stuff, and it's pretty funny because they do have these jars, these granite, corundum, cyanide. I mean, they're made from 1,000 different types of stone. Almost, it feels like. They've got them in the display cabinets next to clay pottery. Like, it's literally lined right up next to this super primitive pottery stuff. And I mean, one of my favorite little objects in the museum is this little tube. It's a tube of lapis lazuli, which is quite a difficult stone. In fact, there's not really any known quarries for this in Egypt. It must have come from somewhere else, perhaps Russia. There's a lot of stone like that, actually. So stuff has been traded and come in from a distance.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it's labeled. It's in a case. It's got this gold sheath, and it's this hollow, perfectly machined sort of little tube of lapis lazuli. Very much a precision object. And it's in this display case with bone ornaments and beads and little chunks of pottery, and it's simply just labeled pre-dynastic because it was found in a pre-dynastic tomb.
Well, they're taking advantage. They're taking advantage of people's ignorance that, they don't understand the hardness of these materials. They don't understand how difficult it can be to work these materials. And when you see a granite pot that is very small, imperfect, right next to a piece of clay pottery, it's the same thing.
Yeah, and it comes back to some of the problems with the way that we determine the story of history, and really this is
right
an institutional problem because the Egyptology in general does not concern itself with the manufacturing and how these things were made. They just don't. That's not their expertise. I mean, Egyptology, it's not a hard science. It's closer to like language studies and arts. I mean, it is, and they, to give everyone their credit, they do a fantastic job of understanding the dynastic Egyptian civilization, daily life, how it functioned, like their afterlife. We know a tremendous amount thanks to Egyptology and the writing and all this interpretation. But these guys don't really concern themselves with the manufacturing of these objects, and they'll say so. Like, they're more concerned with what's written on them, and that's kind of how we go. And of my major points is that it just becomes super obvious once you start looking and seeing it, that the technology of the writing just doesn't match the technology that's evident in the objects themselves, and it's very difficult to then say that the same person did them. And that really opens up that possibility that some of these objects are old, or they've been inherited and then later claimed and written on, which we know happened also. Like, this is a known practice in dynastic Egypt, particularly in the Middle Kingdom with guys like Ramses II and his son Merenptah. They were notorious for taking older statues and older monuments. And remember, this is thousands of years older than them, back to the Old Kingdom. and they would sort of chisel off those names and put their own names on there. And there's no end of examples and evidence for this. And in a lot of cases, we just determine that no, that's Ramses' statue. It's a statue of him, but there's, you know, it's clearly evident that there's these other names that have then been figured out were on here, and they were, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of years older than him. But it's just, we just don't. There's a lacking element of technology and a lack of willingness to, I think, to engage in some of these discussions in Orthodox Egyptology. And I think it's understandable to some degree, but there's a real blinkered situation going on with that at the moment. And you can extend it to beyond technology to things like adjacent fields of science. Like they just ignore the evidence that comes to us now from genetics research. They ignore the evidence that comes to us from, you know, catastrophism and climate history, the Younger Dryas, the extension of the human timeline, all these things that should be having a dramatic impact on the story of our past kind of just get ignored because of their implications. And it's the same thing with the technology. They have such strong implications for the story of history that I think a lot of these guys feel threatened by it, honestly, because I often equate the mainstream archaeology and history story to it's like religion. It's a lot of these guys that have tenure, they have authority, the professors, they write the textbooks. They're an expert at a story. It's a loose interpretation of incomplete evidence. That's what history is. We should always be looking for new evidence and trying to see how this affects. It's like a murder trial that never ends.
Right.
But in the same way that, you know, priests are the expert on a story in the Bible, or they're the, you know, that's where, and their whole authority, their sense of personal power and sense of self is tied up in this story, and their place as the expert on it. I think that's where a lot of these tenured sort of ivory tower academics that scoff and look down their noses at anything alternative, that it's the same thing. They're the experts at the story, and if you start threatening the story, you'll start to threaten them, and that's why you get the whole lack of engagement, and they don't want to talk about it, and it's very difficult to have any sort of rational debate or discussion. And that's just the situation. And then it gets exacerbated by the nature of the internet and the fact that, you know, any idiot on there like me can say stuff now. And you end up with a very defensive establishment field that just dismiss stuff. And
yes,
I do also like to point out that this hasn't always been the case. I mean, guys like Petrie and Belzoni and even Mariette and the guys that were really enthusiastic with dynamite before them, they knew when they were, and quite often admitted when they were looking at stuff they didn't understand or they thought was vastly ancient, didn't match the story of history, and they'd say so. And I think one of the reasons for that is that because the only pushback and their discussions all happened in the halls of academia, like with their colleagues in these societies and in their books. And now it's this global conversation where you've got a big audience in the internet, and there's no gatekeeping function. The discussion's happening outside of academia in a lot of ways.
Right.
So I think all of that lends to this defensive posture and lack of sort of progress with the Orthodox story, despite this what I would consider to be overwhelming evidence that, you know, we need to reevaluate the whole story of human history on this planet.
Yeah, well, it's very similar to, you know, being an earth science teacher. So, you know, I've studied everything to do with earth science. I mean, it's a very difficult, you know, geophysical field to get into and teach, astronomy of the whole 9 yards. And where we see a good example of that in my discipline is with Alfred Wegener and him looking, you know, coming up with plate tectonics. This guy looked at the maps and said, you know, it looks like the continents were once together, right? Like a puzzle piece. It's right there. And they laughed him out of everything. And he ended up smoking himself to death because the only job he could get was as like a weatherman in the, above the Arctic Circle, because nobody would touch him. Nobody would listen to him. And the only reason for that is because they asked him, okay, if these plates are moving around that you're talking about, your puzzle pieces, how are they moving? And at that time, the technology did not exist to understand about convection currents down in the mantle and how that could move. And they destroyed his career, you know?
Yeah.
And we
Familiar
see the
story.
same kind of thing now, except we have the internet and people like you putting videos together and showing everybody out there this evidence. So one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you was because in my mind, we cover everything on this podcast, forbidden archaeology, whatever, UFOs, paranormal, conspiracy theories. And I'm not going to say this, that I think this is a written down plan of like a conspiracy theory, but I heard, and I do want to preface this with saying, I did want to ask you about the Sphinx and the enclosure and the Osiris shaft, but I'm going to drop that because we do need to get into some UFO stuff here. And I know your time is limited, but I want to ask you this. So I want to lead into this next question by saying something that I heard another podcaster say. And this is basically what he said. He said, institutions have at their primary function self-preservation, be it economic, financial, corporate, scientific, political, or anything else. So with that being said, what kind of pushback have you received from the establishment or institutions that act as gatekeepers of knowledge, and as they're holding handfuls of Egyptian sand and it runs through their fingers that they can't control it, we see them lashing out more and more? So what kind of personal things have you had to deal with?
Yeah, it's actually a good comment, and I've often said something similar, which is the nature of establishment is to resist change. I mean, that's just its nature, and you can extend that to institution as well, like that self-preservation quote. That's a good one. And it's very true, and that is simply the nature of it. And the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking was that advances in science and they come from the fringe. They always have. So you used a good example with plate tectonics. The same thing, J. Hullenbrett's with catastrophism, even Galileo. There's advances in science to come from the fringe. That's just the way it is. And it's actually one of the downfalls of the whole peer review system, to be honest. But in terms of pushback, look, I'm not without my critics, that's for sure. And I consider it I'm a sign of success, to be honest, that I'm getting some attention with some of these things. And I've had, and I feel like it's a badge of honor. I've definitely had some run-ins with establishment figures. John Hoops at Kansas State University is the professor of anthropology there, has called me out on Twitter at one point. And then I went to great lengths to return the favor, actually, because he's well known for, he'd been attacking Graham Hancock. He's kind of one of these rabid anti-Younger Dryas people. And in fact, I found one of the funny things about that was that, and this is kind of, it gets into the nitty-gritty about how establishment works, but I love the story because he was forever pointing people like, the Younger Dryas is bullshit, like it's nonsense, it's just recycled sort of Donnelly Comet Impacts, esoterica from the 1700s or something. And just go to the Wikipedia, read the page. Wikipedia, that's the most non-biased source for information about the Younger Dryas.
Oh my God.
And he was Lord.
Going to Wikipedia. And then so I'm like, all right, let's go to Wikipedia. So I went there and turns out, I love that. One nice thing about Wikipedia is you can see who's been editing the page. And lo and behold, the whole 2-page, like hoops. Yeah, he had deleted everything and rewritten that stuff. And look, it's unbiased. It's not biased. He's telling everyone something like, you wrote this.
Wow.
Like unbelievable. And he was calling with the Younger Dryas, there's 250 plus now peer-reviewed scientific papers. There are a lot of very well-credentialed mainstream scientists, guys that work in paleoclimatology and a lot of impact-related sort of sciences, and looking at impact proxies and nanodiamonds and magnetic spherules, all this, the whole mat layer that's associated with that period of time 13,000 years ago. There's 250 papers now. I mean, I think it's getting towards established science, and we've even, all we're missing is a verified crater, and we might even have that now with the Greenland crater. But yeah, he's just dismisses all that as bunk because it messes with his version of history. So I've had a bit of pushback from guys like that, and then there's always a crowd of hecklers, and in terms of people that like to make videos about me that criticize me and I'm yet to find one that isn't just completely ridden with logical fallacies and straw man arguments and appeals to authority I'm not going to engage with it. Like a lot of these guys want that, there's a whole subculture and industry about drama and back and forth. And I think a lot of people enjoy that sort of thing. I think it's a waste of time. I actually have made my thoughts known in some of my videos about how worthwhile I find arguing with people on the internet, which is to say not at all. And it's just, my videos and my work stands for itself. People are free to make whatever content they want about it. But the nice thing about this is that they can't, unless you get to the point of like being deplatformed for being anti-establishment, which, hey, that may come in the future. They're certainly going that direction with YouTube now and a lot of different topics. Thankfully, not history yet, but that's part of the reason I'm trying to build up a support base outside of YouTube, because I see that writing on the wall eventually, just simply by being anti-establishment. They're great. They love suppressing anything that's anti-establishment over YouTube. It's pick your political flavor of the day or topic, and they're gonna squish it, which I think is nonsense. I'm a massive proponent of free speech, which includes the right to criticize. So I fully support anyone's right to, if they want to look at my stuff and make content about it and respond, that's fine. And you can say what you want, but I generally just let my stuff speak for itself. And the nice thing is that you can't really get canceled like this. Like I don't have a career to protect in terms of like tenure at an academic environment or whatever it is. Like, it's just the normal sort of cut and thrust between different fields and content creation. Nothing too severe in terms of pushback, but I try to be relatively respectful about a lot of this stuff too. I make my case, and I don't spend a lot of time criticizing people individually, and I don't respond to people individually. I mean, everyone likes to make a bit of fun of Zahi Hawass here and there, but he's kind of brought that on himself, let's just say, I've had personal engagement with him, and I was there for the infamous debate he had with Graham Hancock, where he kind of, threw all the toys out.
13 seconds? What, did
the
he yell at him?
Debate?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a long series, like a back and forth where he kind of threw
where he walks
chucked
out.
all the toys out the pram. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, I was there. I was in the room.
Okay.
Yeah, and then later on with the debate, it was a farce. It was a shame, and it was a farce. Like there were people there to see a debate. Like, and there was great hope that we would actually have a debate, and a respectful debate. And Hancock, Graham, I know Graham reasonably well. He's nothing if not very respectful. I mean, he doesn't. He's not out here insulting anyone, and he's just got his ideas and he was looking to engage, and that didn't happen. Anyway, but I don't. I don't know. It's the pushback's been fine. There's plenty of people that are critical, but that's just to be expected. And when you're doing something like this in the public sphere, you can't. I kind of treat it like you can't let the negative criticism get to you in the same way that you can't let and for me, it is overwhelmingly positive feedback get to you either. That's all good, but it's not like, I very much appreciate all the positive comments and the feedback for the work, but I'm trying to do my thing, and I can't let that sort of get into your head any more than you can let the negative stuff get to you. Because if you have people looking at your stuff, you're guaranteed going to get negative commentary about it. So it is what it is.
Yeah. I look at it and I scratch my head, because as a science teacher, I teach my kids, you should question things. You should try to use the scientific method. But, it almost feels like to me anymore, it's like, oh, you can say what you want and you can think what you want as long as it's what we say. And it's kind of scary, because at one point, we're giving these kids, we're trying to give them agency. We want them to learn and explore the world. But man, if you ask the wrong question, which I think we're all supposed to do, is ask questions. How are we going to progress if we don't ask questions? And
absolutely,
we're told we can't say certain things because, well, you might upset somebody, or that's not agreed upon language. I mean, at one point I woke up and I was like, did we wake up in Nazi Germany at some point? And we can't have a discussion because we can't say something that might upset somebody. How do you ever learn anything if you don't upset people?
That's right.
You know, and how do they learn? They don't.
Yeah,
how do they learn?
100%.
They go to Wikipedia, obviously.
Yeah. So do the professors, and they write it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Even my 7th graders know not to touch Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's a horribly biased source. I've pointed that out in a few of my YouTube live stream videos that I've done. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Like that's there. I 100% agree with that sentiment, and I think we have a real problem on our hands. The whole the scientific method is one thing. It's being turned into a. I think there's a good comment I heard from a I forgot. God, it's someone from like Hoover Institute fellow. It wasn't Tom Sowell. It was someone else, but had talked about that a lot of like religion and science is replacing religion as this belief system, and a lot of people like believe in science, and it's just simply not a belief system. It's a method for evaluating the world. Like there's you're anti-science, you're against it. No, the nature of science, and it's neither is it a consensus sport, by the way. But
right,
and we would still be on a flat Earth if that was the case. But I still believe that. But you're absolutely right in that things like universities in particular, but that places like that are supposed to challenge you. And
that's right.
Yeah, this limiting of ideas and even words. I'm against all of it. I'm very much a proponent of free speech, and you don't have any right not to be offended, as far as I'm concerned. You'll be okay. Toughen up, sugar. Like it's. Like if getting offended is not the end of the world, and the best response to speech you don't like is more speech.
Yeah,
and that's how we progress and learn. Ideas get tested in that marketplace of ideas. Things rise and fail. They get tested. They fail, and you can often take some measure of truth or some measure of progress from even bad ideas. Like that's the right. Nature of progress, and we're kind of arbitrarily cutting ourselves off at the knees, and I think coddling almost entire generations away from conflict and things like that. We have to learn to be able to deal with that sort of stuff as human beings, and be able to deal with ideas we don't like and handle them and respond to them. Like that's I share all of you. We could probably talk for hours about this too, but I share your opinions on that stuff for sure.
Okay, well, let's move on to a little bit of something else. Now, you did hit on one of my favorite ideas, and it goes back to the college and institution things, but the Younger Dryas impact theory. Now, I noticed that you've done a lot of work with Randall Carlson, Grimerica podcast, the Brothers of the Serpent, which we're going to have on later next
Monday.
week. The Snakes. Yep.
Monday.
Snakes.
We'll be interviewing them Monday, and we'll put that show out on that following Sunday. But yeah, great bunch of guys. And you guys were working on what you guys have termed Contact at the Cabin.
Yeah.
And can you tell our audience about what that entailed and what that's really about? And because I'm very familiar with the Younger Dryas, and let me tell you why. And you'll probably get a kick out of this. My paleontology and earth science professor, great guy, he put up the explanation of when I asked him what happened to all the megafauna. And this was years ago. This was before I knew about Randall Carlson or anything, that things did not sound right. I said, you had woolly mammoths, you had mastodons, you had saber-toothed tigers. What is the deal? And he said the accepted ideas are chill, ill, or kill, or a combination of the three. So it got cold. It got cold. They got sick, and then humans killed everything. And then he mentioned off to the side, well, there is a little idea about might have been a impact of some type somewhere, but it was in the same breath where he was also explaining to us about the meltwater pulses, meltwater pulse A and B. It's like, where'd all the ice go? What happened? Ice dam broke. And
repeatedly, apparently.
Yeah. So So if people are interested in learning about that, look up Randall Carlson and digging into the Younger Dryas impact. But Ben is into this. He knows quite a bit about it. And I just want to turn it over to you and have you talk about it a little bit.
Well, sure. We'll get to Contact the Cabin too, and Randall. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Randall. Very privileged to have gotten to know him a little bit in the last year or so. But and I've done a couple podcasts with him. He's great. He's a fountain of knowledge. But yeah, so actually, that's the funny that the chill kind of falls into it too. But right, there's a tremendous number of kind of what would you say? I guess coincidences around that period of time that sort of make it a very interesting period of history. But few people really, I think, realize that there's been a massive cataclysm on the planet, and that's when I was talking about the 250 peer-reviewed papers.
Yes.
Earlier, I mean, those are in support of the Younger Dryas cosmic impact theory or hypothesis, which is what it is. I think it's very close to becoming established science. But yeah, as you said, it's kind of that period is 12,800 years ago to 11,600 years ago. That is the end of the Pleistocene or the end of the Ice Age, the beginning of the Holocene, our modern epoch. And there is, and a lot of this evidence for something catastrophic happening started to pile up kind of in the later part of last century, the like 1980s and 90s. Tremendous amount of evidence for it. And it started really with the thing that sort of triggered a lot of it was these ice core samples that they got out of Greenland and then also out of Vostok in Antarctica, not Vostok, that's Russia, but Antarctica.
Yes.
So in ice, when it gets laid down year after year with snowfall, we're getting better and better at really granularly determining things like temperature and oxygen isotopes, and there's a lot we can tell about the climate on the planet going back in these different layers. And it turns out that there's a tremendously disruptive period around that time, and ever since then we've been in this steady, beautiful sort of gradual warming and pretty much just flatlining off to this nice weather that we've had for the last 8,000 or 9,000 years, which is the reason why our civilization has risen to where it is, frankly. But so there's this, that's where it started, and then it wasn't until 2005 that the first paper came out that really went and looked at, hey, there is tremendous evidence now in the strata layers around the planet for impact proxies, and these are exactly what they sound like. They're proxies. They're indicators of an impact.
The shock quartz, right?
Right. So yeah,
nano diamonds.
Yeah, shock synthesized nano diamonds, the magnetic spherules, the extraterrestrial platinum and iridium. There's a black matte layer. There's also evidence of like 10% of the biomass on the planet burning around that point. And this is in a layer that's a well-defined and well kind of good province, if you like, for this layer and where it relates in terms of dating. Funny story. They actually went to a lot of archaeological sites in the US to do this. And because the Clovis layer, the Clovis people, as that's that 13,000 year date, they went to a lot of these established sites to get this data. But now we have evidence for this in more than 50 sites in the US, as well as sites in South America, in Chile, in South Africa, all show the same thing. There was something happened, massive correlation to this proxy to this impact. All of this microscopic evidence in these layers in the soil. Oh, by the way, also this giant megafauna extinction around the same time, and that was equivalent. Like people think, oh, it was overhunting. It's absolute rubbish because it's ridiculous. The amount of species that went extinct is the equivalent of the number of large species that are alive today. Literally half of the megafauna got eradicated in a very short period of time, right down to 2 species of birds. And so if you're telling me that sort of small roving bands of Paleo-Indian hunters are responsible for this, it's nonsense.
They were eating dire wolves. They were eating saber-toothed
short-faced bears.
The short-faced bear, which made human snacks. Yeah, that's what we were hunting.
Some of the most savage, largest creatures. Like there's no, we didn't manage to do it even with guns. And
right.
So, and then the other thing you mentioned also is, all the ice melted all of a sudden, these huge meltwater pulses. And in this period, sea levels rose 350 odd feet in a fairly short order. And there's other, there's a lot of dynamics. And so where Randall sits in this is he's he looks at the other angle of evidence for this, which I would classify kind of the big scale, the geological evidence for catastrophe and catastrophism, and these massive, massive floods on the order of just orders of magnitude beyond anything we've ever could imagine. And he spent his life kind of researching this and moving that discussion forward, because he also stands on the shoulders of predecessors like J. Harlan Brett's, and this is where the channeled scablands comes into it. This is the scablands of eastern Washington state, which was essentially a giant floodplain that was created in a period of a couple of weeks as a result of these absolutely monstrous catastrophic floods at the end of the last ice age, most likely one or two of them. And this is where the mainstream science and Randall kind of collide. And there's a long history here with the way that geology's worked over time as a science, with gradualism and uniformitarianism being the explanation for everything. This was a result of the age of reason when science first started to develop, and it was moving away from religion, which of course contains all these stories, funny enough, of catastrophes, of flood, of fire.
Yeah,
not just
something like 150 flood stories out there in mythologies around the world that talk about humans that have survived a massive cataclysm. But we can't talk about that because that's too closely related to religion. And then that means that maybe in the Bible, instead of it being a nice story for people to get something from, it might actually be part historical document. But, we can't touch that.
That's right. Yeah, well, and that's where geology was. They when geology first arose as a science, they literally had a stated goal for like 60 years to use gradual, like erosion, the gentle erosion that we see working today they had to come up with explanations for everything we see. And that was a stated goal. And it was simply to get away from that catastrophism of religion. Now, they definitely overcorrected a bit. And this is still in effect in some textbooks today. Like, there's still some crazy explanations in geology for some features that are much more elegantly explained as a result of catastrophism. And that's what the scablands are. That's what Randall looks at. And he's an incredibly intelligent guy. He's a genius, honestly, and he reads a lot of these papers. He's up to date on all this. And so Contact at the Cabins is a group of a couple of friends of mine, the podcasters we got together. They had done this in the past. This has been a group. I've just recently joined them, and I will be going on future trips, but it's a chance for people to get out into the field with Randall and with other experts into places like the channeled scablands, but also other places, and spend a week going through this evidence, like talking and getting into it, looking at the evidence firsthand, looking at these landscapes. And I've got a lot of this on captured on my videos. I cover the evidence for catastrophe in religions across the planet. I've got videos on all of this stuff, but by far and away, some of the most spectacular stuff is the channeled scablands and kind of the evidence for widespread flooding and massive cataclysm, because that's what happened. As far as I'm concerned, like we're a species with amnesia. That's a great term that Graham Hancock popularized.
Yes. And,
our species, we went through a giant sort of knockout blow only 13,000 years ago. And as a species, we've been here maybe 350, 400,000 years at a minimum. There's a chance that we've been here significantly longer when you look at some of the DNA and genetic evidence. But in terms of human remains, that's where we're at now. We used to think we were 50,000 years old. Now then it went to 110. Now it's 300 to 400 based on the latest finds. Yep. And, history and civilization as we know it arose in the last 6,000 years. It's nonsense.
Right. And that kind of goes with my thinking of the ancient technology or high technology. It's like, if you look what humans have done just in the last 150, 200 years, and we've been on this planet with our brain size and everything for the last, let's be conservative, 200,000 years. All right.
Sure.
What possibly could we have come up with? I mean, obviously we had somebody built the pyramids to precision. Somebody knew how to make granite boxes to precision. They were not, well, they might have been hunter-gatherers maybe after a cataclysm, but it makes no sense to sit there and say, and by the way, when you talk about the sea level changing after the end of the last ice age, 350, 400 feet, That's all your continental shelf. And people
Well,
love to live next to water.
10 million square miles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just gone. Just gone. So
and that's where we should be looking. And that's
Yes.
not an area that we look though. That's
well, we drill it.
Well, we drill it, but and marine
Yeah.
archaeology is almost solely focused on shipwrecks. There's been no sort of wide scale search for evidence of civilization in that sort of 300 to 400 foot continental shelf areas. And that, like I said, that 10 million square miles, it's an awful lot of land. Yeah. And I mean, there was a find in Morocco that dated us to more than a human remains. That's the oldest human remains is over 300,000 years old now. So we know we've been here at least that long. And yeah, I mean, the ideas with the DNA evidence is that we split with a common ancestor with the Neanderthals somewhere around the 800 to 900,000 year range. Like that's where they think that might have occurred.
And humans have probably lived through quite a few cataclysms. I remember a video that I showed my students that was about volcanic eruptions and like super volcanoes and things. And about 76,000 years ago, they were talking about how humans were down to about the last anywhere from 5,000 to 15,000 wandering Africa, just trying to survive, that they can trace all DNA to all humans back to this small surviving group of a massive cataclysm of volcanic,
Yep.
So it's out there.
There's actually a Y chromosome bottleneck around the Younger Dryas as well. This is new evidence. This only just came out. Tony Zamora has some very good videos on it on YouTube. But yeah, right around that Younger Dryas period, there was a massive decline in male populations across cultures everywhere in the world. I wonder why.
Right.
Yeah, and as you say, I think we are the survivors, and that happens to be the story. That's always that almost every culture. I mean, you can't really find one that doesn't have a story like that. That ancient or modern religion, for that matter, that doesn't talk about our ancestors going through some form of world-ending cataclysm, and then being forced to start again and go again. And it's happened repeatedly, and on a long enough time frame, the chances of it happening again get to 100%. These sort of things will happen again, and it's one thing, we'll probably survive them, and the hunter-gatherer cultures around the world will survive them. But these are they'll end civilizations, which is kind of my point. We've been through cataclysms that would have ended civilizations. And while pockets of humanity may have survived, and even some pockets of knowledge, and I think that's what happened in Egypt. I think that was a kind of a culture that was kickstarted with a fair bit of an inheritance, both culturally and in terms of objects and structures. But and that's what they say too. They literally call themselves a legacy civilization. Yeah, and they trace their own history back some 30 or 40,000 years through the Turin papyrus, and then. At least that's the only piece of evidence we have for it. But they call themselves a legacy civilization, and they're telling us the story. Yeah, and, there's a lot of the same with religions. There's data in them that's it's mystified and it's deified and it's put into these stories. But that's also how human beings retain knowledge. We have these oral traditions. You can't just give people data. You have to, if you put it into the context of a story and these tales, then they get remembered. They get passed on, and I think for a lot of that stuff, there are grains of truth in a lot of it, and I think there's a lot of religious books and stories are essentially, to some degree, eyewitness accounts of cataclysm and things that have happened that we've lived through. So, yeah,
100%. Okay, before we end the podcast tonight, we got to switch gears and we have to go to the UFOs now. I do know you're with your live Twitch streaming that you do. You put out awesome videos. Again, everybody go check them out. And by the way, the Younger Dryas, if you want to learn more about the Younger Dryas impact theory, check out Ben's, I think it's a 2-part interview you do with Randall. Mm-hmm. And if anybody has ever watched Joe Rogan, you've seen Randall on his podcast probably, I think, 4 or 5 times.
Been on
at
there
this
a few
point.
Times,
So Randall is very knowledgeable and very much looking into these studies of the Younger Dryas impact, and he knows his stuff. So there's plenty of research out there for you guys to do on your own. But on Twitch, you were talking last night that you had about a 3-hour video, and there's no way I want to talk to you that long about it because I know you're getting tired. But
good.
on Twitch, you talked about UFOs and your ideas between disclosure and what these things might be. Now, I started watching it, okay, but I stopped it because I didn't want to get any bias and just put it out there for you to talk about. So what do you make of all of these UFOs in the news and this upcoming report that is supposedly getting released by the end of this month? And a lot of it's already been leaked, like, well, people aren't going to be that impressed by what you get told, right?
So embrace yourself for disappointment on that thing, I'm pretty sure. But yeah.
And I'm going to just throw it out there, and we can end with this as if you would like. But
whatever. We'll see how we go.
The ancient alien hypothesis, okay? And that's why I like talking about Egypt, because these things seem to cross paths like a bad Ghostbuster movies when they say don't cross the beams. It's like, well, we don't know
whole
how
industry
they built
doing that.
Right. We don't know how the pyramids were made. We don't know this. It was aliens.
Right.
Right.
Oh, sure.
So
Hugh Giorgio.
Yeah. So what do you make of all of this?
So I did do that stream, and it is not. I've never really talked about. It's not something that comes up in my work. So at a high level, I can tell you that I don't need it to explain what we're looking at in terms of megalithic and ancient cultures. I don't think it's involved there. I just don't. I don't need it, and I think that human history is rich enough, and that our past is long enough that we've probably risen to other forms of civilization now. And this is why I wanted to get into it, and I spent a lot of time talking through the context of this in that stream, because that's not to say that I don't find the whole thing entirely plausible, and there's a whole different number of degrees and angles you can take on that. So
there's a nuance.
First of all, there's a lot of nuance,
yeah.
Right? So at a high level, and I can run through. I'm sure your listeners, if they're familiar with the topic, will understand a lot of these things. So I think the whole intervention theory is quite likely, but a couple different potential flavors of that too. So in terms of how life itself may have been started on the planet, so there's a lot of mystery around that. How DNA kicked off, and as we can talk for days about just DNA and the inherent technology of that. That even though we've had a lot of evolution, DNA itself has never changed as a technology that expresses life. It itself has never changed, and there's still a mystery around how that started. So panspermia, or even the Prometheus model of being seeded, entirely plausible to me. And you've got the other thing I say a lot is that across anyone who thinks long and hard enough about the vastness of space and the depth of time of the universe, I mean, and if you've done any research in the Kepler missions and just understanding that I'm absolutely certain, and I feel like it's almost a mathematical certainty at this point, that the universe is likely teeming with life, and there's a good chance that some of it has developed quite a long way. So I will say that I find it all very plausible. But at the same time, it's the whole, and this gets to some of the modern phenomena. It's all, I'm sure there also is there's been a lot of hoaxing. There's a whole industry around the attention to this. It's one of those tricky things about, same thing as the Bigfoot realm, right? What's legit? What isn't? What's this? What's that? I sort of treat it, and personally for me, it's like, I find it all very plausible, like Roswell, sure. And even before then, there was reports of it. The whole abduction experience that's a modern phenomena, but it also ties in closely to like fairy stories from the Middle Ages, and people being abducted from their families with fairies in the same sort of experiences, the same time dilation effect, all these things. It seems entirely plausible to me. And even some of the crazy conspiracy stuff that I'd classify it as, with I forget the name of the hacker guy, that Gary, is it McKinnon or someone, that there's these supposedly reports of off-world stations, and we've got military postings, and there's been contact already. And again, plausible. I also, don't ever think that we'll find out the truth, because even with the disclosure that's happening now, and it's not like it's a new thing, right? The Mexican government, the UK, and there's been other disclosure projects. I don't think anyone's going to really trust what the government says about this, because they've had a long and storied history of basically telling fibs about it, and Project Blue Book and Blue Beam, whatever it is, back in the
Project
day.
Blue Book, yeah.
Blue Book, yeah, and you know, I just don't think anyone's going to really trust what comes out in terms of report. I'm kind of not convinced that we'll ever really get to the truth. So I kind of just accept it all as plausible and move on with my day. Like, it doesn't, I wouldn't be surprised. Say that. Let's say they massive announcements were made. Okay, it's not going to radically change my existence. I think it's entirely plausible. And I go so far as also to think that, you know, there's a possibility that life itself, the moon, there's a lot of interesting elements to where we live and how life's evolved here. And I think that intervention theory could be is something that even has to do with humans ourselves, like our place in the tree of life on this planet could have been engineered. It's plausible. And this is the Sitchin story and people of Anunnaki, which I'm not a huge fan of. I kind of tend to err on the side of, like, mostly he's been debunked, I think, with some of the translation stuff. But the story itself and the concept, I don't just rule it out. I think it's entirely plausible. And there's actually some interesting evidence. Guys like Lloyd Pye show from a genetic standpoint that are suggestive of things like engineering genetic engineering that's happened to humans. So I'm interested in all of it. I don't need it for the ancient architecture stuff. Although, again, I'm sure that if there's been other species or other whatever it is visiting this phenomena occurring, I'm sure it was occurring back then too. And there's even some evidence that suggests it was. But I don't like, they're not like landing pads. You know, Baalbek's not a landing pad for a spaceship, and the Nazca lines aren't landing strips. I don't go down that path with it all. So yeah, that's more or less my opinion. I'm very interested, and I think it's all very plausible, but I tend to steer away from the ancient aliens topic just because of honestly, that the show and it's one of the big labels that gets slapped on to anything alternative. You know, you don't think that the Egyptians built it, then you must think the aliens did it. And
that's right.
You know, I've even seen people that make videos about my stuff with, like, there's a picture of me, a picture of Chris Dunn, the Petrie's Core number 7, and a spaceship behind us. It's it's the most common straw man that I get. Is that, you must think the aliens done it. And I've even had people say that to me. A guide in South America that we were with on a later trip, his guy was he was not happy with the idea that I'd been to Peru before, which I had, and then he was not pleased with the idea with me sort of questioning the architecture and looking at the different styles. And he at one point did say, well, if you don't think the Inca did it, you must think the aliens did it. I'm like, yeah, okay, never heard that one before.
Yeah.
It's just not possible that there's more nuance to it than that, I suppose. But yeah, very common straw man argument. So it's not a topic that I tend to touch on in my videos too much, but I wanted to touch on it in that stream because it was, you know, it's topical, and I get the question a fair bit about what do I think. Yeah, I think the universe is a strange place, and I think it's all very plausible. And you know, I'm just open-minded to it, and I'm not so much seeking. I don't think I'm ever going to find the answer. Honestly, I think it is. I've not had any experiences like that, or I've not seen anything myself, or had any life-changing experiences like that. So yeah, but I'm open-minded to it all. You know, whether it's interdimensional or, you know, like intergalactic or time travel, it's us from the future. Who knows? There's a million different theories about this stuff.
Right.
Or it's coming from the deep oceans. I don't know. But yeah, a lot of this stuff's plausible. I think.
Especially a lot that we're hearing now from the Navy.
Right.
You know, which is very bizarre. But all right.
Yeah. Some of the sensor videos are interesting. Yeah, I've been paying attention to it. So I mean, yeah, there's a lot going on. There's either some really crazy advanced drone projects, or even sensor spoofing projects, or who knows what going on. But or it's something else, you know.
Right.
I'm just like, I wouldn't hold my breath for an honest answer.
Correct. All right. So ending question. So you already answered one of them, was if you had any experience with any UFOs or UAPs or anything like that in all your travels. And
no, I have a Celestron 8-inch telescope back here, and I do have a big field of view. I go out meteor watching quite a bit on my back hill here, and yeah, I can't say that I've had that experience.
Okay.
But I keep looking.
Any like paranormal experiences such as ghosts, spirits, any of that?
No, I can't say that I have. I just don't. And I'm also though. It's a funny thing. I don't dream either. So there's like I think a lot of that with either.
Really?
Yeah, so people have. Yeah, it's weird. I very rarely, like a handful of times in my life. I've always had this. I go to sleep and I wake. I just don't dream. There's a long story associated with some of that, but I don't know if that's part of it. If people, it has to do with like sleepwalking or dreaming or anything like that can be maybe construed as either those experiences. I don't know if it's related, and I'm not ruling out the paranormal stuff either. I'm interested, but yeah, no, I've never had any of those types of experiences. I'd be interested in them either way. I'm generally pretty rational and try to get to the bottom of a lot of things. But I did learn in Egypt that there's an emotional connection and this strange, because I went there thinking I'd be entirely rational and just trying to evaluate this stuff. But you know, when you're there, there's absolutely like this left brain, right brain thing that happens. We have a real emotional reaction to some of these things. And you know, that's not to say that I haven't had very profound experiences. I've had a few of those, and I'm a big believer in like the benefit of properly used psychedelics, and you know, whether it's whatever DMT or psilocybin. I think that's actually has a strong relation to our history. And there's a very interesting book called The Immortality Key that's come out recently. Brian Marescu, who Graham Hancock took on the Rogan show. And I like Hancock's work in that space too. And I've gone down a little bit of that path myself too, and I've had those profound experiences, but I wouldn't describe them as paranormal, but absolutely profound as well. I mean, at the same time.
I know there's some colleges, like some high level, I want to say Yale or anyway, there are some professors that are seriously looking into why do people have these same kind of DMT trips.
Yeah, Strassman did a lot of work on it.
Yeah, so it's very interesting that we seem to be going back a little bit in time, where they were messing with psychedelics in the 50s and 60s and all that, and ESP training, and you know, now it seems like we're coming full circle again. All right, so last question for you is the 3 creepiest places that you ever visited that just made you extremely, besides this podcast, made you extremely uncomfortable, and you just had to get out of there.
Goldman Sachs.
There you go. Right. It gives everybody the creeps.
The Heart of Darkness. Well, yeah, I mean, I used to say as part of the when in IT, I did actually eventually, like, I'm not working with these guys anymore. I wasn't interested. But in terms of ancient, honestly, Goldman Sachs, some of the places in China, but yeah, I would classify it as I felt just dirty being in there helping those guys. It's a tough one to answer. In terms of ancient sites, let me think. It was I guess creepy is like, and I heard Jimmy talking about that at some of these places. I really don't. I'm usually quite excited to be in places, and I'm not at all scared by the like dark places and
the Curse of the Pharaoh.
Any of that? No, I quite enjoy like there's a mastaba in my Doom called Mastaba 17, and you got to get like down and crawl through this dirt passage, and it's very tight and squeezy. But it's just it was revelatory getting in there for me. It wasn't creepy at all. I mean, I have to say, like Zone X, which is a not very well known place above Cusco near Sacsayhuaman. That's a bunch of like caves and some of those types of things. There's, I guess you'd probably describe that as being relatively creepy, but I don't. You know, I've heard people say that like the Osiris Shaft was a bit creepy. I didn't. I just I'm fascinated by it. I don't. It's hard for me to say any of those places would be really creepy. And I mean, I've been exploring in the catacombs under Sacsayhuaman in rooms just filled up with human bones, and human remains and things. I'm just not like, nope, that's fine. Like I'm good with that. Like that's just they're massive necropolises.
Wasn't there human bones down at the bottom of or at least on the second level of the Osiris shaft that were kind of people didn't understand what that was about?
They're everywhere there. You just bone people. I mean, I have videos and it's little clips I have scattered in some of my content. But yeah, I've gotten into some places that are kind of off limits, and there's catacombs in Saqqara and also a lot of these places. But you literally have like tons of skulls and like rooms knee deep in full of bones, like just human remains that have just been piled up in there. And other burials where you've got intact skeletons and things like that. They've been burying people in these places for thousands of years and up until fairly recent times. So it's not. We're exploring these giant necropolises. That just doesn't bother me though. I'm not in there taking souvenirs or anything. So, and I'm just passing through looking at the walls more than the bones, I suppose. But it was. Those are good experiences for me. I enjoyed them.
Okay, awesome. All right, Ben. So before you take off, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, your social media? What do you got going on that people can check you out? Because you need to check Ben out in his videos. They will change they will change your mind. I mean, his videos are a consciousness opening experience, and
thank you.
You learn so much. I've probably learned more than going to university just by watching these videos.
Wow.
So.
Well, thank you.
I mean, I never I'm just telling you, I'm being honest. These are great videos. The conversations you've had with Randall, the stuff you're doing on Twitch now, it's amazing. So tell everybody where they can find you. Oh, and by the way, yes, I am wearing my megalith.
Megalithics. I see it. Yeah, good on you.
Yes. So I'm trying to
got the merch.
Yes, absolutely. So tell everybody where to find you.
Yeah, so obviously it's just search for UnchartedX on YouTube. It's that's probably the best place. Otherwise, it's unchartedx.com. You can pretty much find links to everything I'm doing there as well if you're interested. And as you said, I am on Twitch. I do stream pretty regularly. I think Tuesdays, Fridays, and Sundays, and outside of those times as well. So you can find me on Twitch, Twitter. Oh, pardon me. I think on Twitter I'm UnchartedX1. I believe Instagram UnchartedX7. But yeah, I have links to all of those like in my videos. So probably the best place is just go search for UnchartedX on
Watch
YouTube,
the videos.
or go to my website, right? And if you look down in any of the details and the I guess the description under the videos, you'll find links to anywhere else if you're interested. I have a Discord server too. I like to plug that. That's a good community. I know you're a part of it.
Yes.
In fact, that's kind of how we got to talking about doing the podcast. So got a good Discord community full of a couple hundred people that are really interested. There's a lot of discussions going on there all the time. It's a good place to kind of hang out and test ideas and talk to other people. So links to all of those on the website.
And you do have merch. So if you want to help support Ben and his projects, cool. You've got the merch out there. And then you're also doing something with a producer, executive producer, Patreon. What's going on with that?
Well, so I'm very grateful for my patrons and people that choose to support me through the various mechanisms. I try to be as open as I can, but over time, I've found that there has been some very generous people that I'm very gracious to that want to give me $100 or more or $200 or more, and so I've tried to find a way, and I've borrowed heavily from the No Agenda Show, which is a fantastic podcast. I'd recommend that one to everyone. I'm a massive fan of those guys, and that's where I get the value for value model from, and where I also get the producership idea from. So it's by way of being able to thank people that do support me in those larger amounts. I give them credits, and the credits work the same way that Hollywood credits work. So producers credits on movies and on TV shows, it's exactly the same thing. That's what an executive producer is. They're help funding the project. So I've started giving those credits now on videos to people that support me in those higher amounts, and it's a real credit. So you get credited in the video. I usually say thank you, and then but on the YouTube and whatever else, and I'll vouch for them should anyone ask. So some people put them on LinkedIn as a producer credit. You probably even use them. Yeah, resume or like Screen Actors Guild even. Like you can,
Yeah.
there's some interesting things you can do with producership, actual credits. So yeah, that's what they are. And it's ultimately it's a way for me to say thank you to people that have been real generous. I try to find ways to do that. So yeah, that's the deal. It's a new thing I'm trying out, and we'll see how it goes. But
Awesome.
so far so good.
And next big project, next thing coming up.
Part 2 of this video, really. I've got a few things going on though, where I'm off to South America in August with Brian Forrester and also Jimmy from the Bright Insight channel. We've that trip's been booked out for a while, but August down to for a couple of weeks in Peru and Bolivia again. It's been a few years. I have a trip in October back to Egypt. That sold out pretty quickly. I think a few spots did recently open up on that. Details for any of that stuff, if you're interested, tours are on my website as well. UnchartedX.com/tour, I think, is the one for the tour. And so I'm looking at planning trips for next year. So we're actually probably going to run a pretty big trip between with the Contact at the Cabin group to Egypt. Oh, and in September we're doing another Contact at the Cabin group with Randall. So Randall Carlson, we're back to the Scablands for another week. We added a whole day to the itinerary. I can tell you the last one I was on the last one. When was that? In May. It was a blast. Like I was just an attendee at that one, and fantastic time. So if anyone's interested in learning a bit more about this mega flood and these landscapes and spending some time with Randall Carlson, then look for that. It's contactatthecabin.com if you're interested. But yeah, that's coming up in September. So I've kind of got a busy rest of the year, but video projects, I've got a bunch of videos lined up. Part 2 for this look at the Middle Pyramids complex. And then yeah, I've got a number of topics that are I've been sort of grinding on for quite a while. Got some Tiwanaku books. I got to do another video on Puma Punku. A few things. So it's just try to get them done and get them released.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's going to be a wrap. Make sure you check out UnchartedX.com and you can find out all the information that we're talking about if you have any questions. Shell, anything you want to add?
No, I'm just looking at how I can add a younger audience too with your YouTube videos with my mythology class starting in the fall again.
Yeah, she teaches a part of Egyptian mythology. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I do have one video that might fit that just out off the top of my head. It's called Myths, Gods, and the Younger Dryas Cataclysm. And it's a specific look at mythology and religions and how it relates to the cataclysm. There's a lot of interesting examples from the Mahabharata to Revelations to ancient, the Aztec and Maya stories. So yeah,
awesome.
Covers a bit of breadth there.
So I'll get you some younger viewers.
Cool. Yeah. That's not generally my demographic, I can tell you, but that's cool. That would be great. Actually, like I gotta say, I do have some people like on Twitch and things like that. People in their 20s, even 16 and 18. I'm always fascinated to hear from younger people like that. Just that they're on that path. It's really encouraging. I love it because I think you said earlier that there's a global consciousness and a global awakening happening, and I think there is.
I do too.
For a lot of this stuff, I think there are a lot of people are having their eyes opened and they're questioning some of these established narratives, and I think that's an extremely healthy thing. And the younger you are, you can start doing some of that, the better, really. So,
yeah, it seems like the harder that they try to suppress people's curiosity, the more it comes through, and the more they push. So, all right, we're gonna wrap it up there, Ben. Cool. It's been an honor and a privilege. I've been following you for a while. Absolutely love your work. Glad you could make it on and have a chat with us. We got your friends coming up here soon, the Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and then Johanna James from the UK. Yeah. So awesome. Looking forward to these talks. So
cool. Thanks, Wayne. Thanks, Michelle. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. Well, thank you, Ben. Have a good one.
Cheers.
We'll talk to you soon.
Wow, Michelle, that was just a fantastic interview.
I love hearing about Egypt.
Absolutely.
So much information. He is so knowledgeable.
And we've only scratched the surface.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear more stories from him later on as he continues to do research.
Yeah, he does just absolutely amazing work. His work with Randall Carlson, Graham Hancock, and people in this field that are not afraid to ask important questions.
Well, and actually dig for some sort of serious explanation and not just from Wikipedia.
That the professor just happens to be writing and editing, but that's not biased at all.
Seriously, a shake my head moment.
A perfect example of how institutions want to protect what they feel is theirs. A lot of ego and just gatekeeping going on.
Don't always run to just the one resource, folks. You gotta dig.
Absolutely. No pun intended.
No pun intended.
All right. I think with that, make sure everybody go check out Ben's website, UnchartedX, all one word, .com, and that can lead you to all of his other material, his YouTube videos. You can watch the videos on his website. You can find his social media. He's everywhere you want to look. And with that, Michelle?
Well, have a good one, folks, and we will talk to you soon.
And keep your eyes to the sky.
You have been listening to the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast. You can reach us at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at mi_UFO and join our Facebook group by searching for Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters. So until next time.
Join me, George Norrie, for Contact in the Desert Worldwide Virtual UFO Conference, June 25th to the 28th. Contact in the Desert will be an epic weekend of exploration into UFOs, ancient alien civilizations, consciousness, AI, crop circles, and cutting-edge science. More than 130 presentations, 67 speakers, and 2 extra weeks to view our extraordinary lineup. Get your tickets today at contactinthedesert.com. It's time to make contact. ContactInTheDesert.com.